us. Before we started the broadcast, we were kind of lamenting how zoomed out we all are. So we totally appreciate you being with us this afternoon. My name is Julie Camerata. I am the Executive Director of the DC Special Education Co-op. From the list of attendees, I see many familiar names. I'm sure you're familiar with the co-op, but I'll just give you a very quick overview of the organization. We are a nonprofit that is, I think, somewhat special because we were founded by charter schools. Schools that at the very beginning of the charter movement knew that they needed to serve students with disabilities, but needed some extra support. So they created the co-op. We've been in operation for approximately 20 years. We have 54 LEAs as members. Many of you work at our member schools, and so thank you so much for your support and for being here and for your interest in our work. We have three main programs. The Elevate program, which this work falls under, that kind of really encompasses all of our compliance and quality work when it comes to serving students with disabilities. It's professional development, it's technical assistance, and it's these special innovation projects that we do from time to time. Our DC 3C program serves schools working with students who are eligible for secondary transition support. So if you have students ages 14 and above and need some extra assistance with secondary transition, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And finally, our school-based Medicaid program, which is our sleeper program. It's pretty cool. Not many schools are taking advantage of it, but we have about, I think, 17 or 18 LEAs who are using Medicaid to bring additional revenue back into their buildings. And I think it's very exciting. It was one of the founding mission statements of the co-op was to get public charter schools access to this. And 20 years later, we did it, thanks to Monica, who's here on the call today or on the webinar. And so if you're interested in Medicaid billing, also please don't hesitate to reach out. It's a lot, but it's a pretty exciting way to enhance your program. So I'll leave it there. And next, I'll just tell you a little bit about this project that we're kind of wrapping up phase one. We had a 3-year grant from OSSI, and what we decided to do was build what we're calling demonstration classrooms. For those of you who've been working here in DC for a long time, you'll know that one of the most frequently asked questions is, who's doing special education well? Where can I go see it? I need to see it working here in DC. And from the co-op's vantage point, we've seen these like pockets of excellence over the years at various charter schools. And what we wanted to do was contribute to that by partnering with 3 LEAs to create 1 classroom each based on their results from their Elevate Needs Assessment, which they did with us. And over the past 3 years, we've created 3 different classrooms at 3 different LEAs. You can go back to our website. We can drop the link in after I finish, I'll drop it in. We did a UDL demonstration classroom, a co-teaching demonstration classroom, and this is our final classroom based on evidence-based interventions and our partnership with DC Bilingual. And so with that, I want to thank Megan Alderton, who's our program quality specialist. She's the mastermind behind this work. And also thank Rohini Ramnath, who is the representative from DC Bilingual. She is the upper elementary school principal and was really instrumental in helping us bring this classroom to fruition. So I'll turn it over to you and let you tell our guests about DCB.
Thank you so much, Julie. And hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. Let's start with my favorite thing to talk about, which is DC Bilingual, and let's back it up. We were founded in 2004 to provide an innovative dual immersion Spanish and English learning program for all students, regardless of their home language. Through our rigorous academic curriculum, comprehensive arts, technology, and athletics program, we celebrate diverse cultures. In DC Bilingual, students learn the skills and values they need to become influential participants of our community. We are a bilingual 50-50 pre-K to 5th model. All students are first, second, or third language learners, and all students have the opportunity to be both language learners and language models for their peers. Literacy, including reading and writing, is taught in Spanish and English for all students. Math is entirely taught in English, and science is entirely taught in Spanish. English literacy is infused with social studies content, and Spanish literacy supports learning in science. When we break down our demographics of the school, first we think about enrollment. DC Bilingual has a current enrollment of 476, now just added a student, 476 students in pre-K through 5th grade. At full enrollment in 2020, we will have 478 students in 23 classrooms. Students come from all 8 wards of the DC larger city. 53% of our students identify as Hispanic or Latinx, 22% identify as white, and 21% identify as Black or African American. Over the last 9 years, ranging our percentage of students who identify as students with special needs have ranged from 13 to 17% of our overall population. And there are an additional 4 students with 504 plans currently. Currently, our percentage is 13.1% of students who have IEPs, and around 40% of our students are identified as English language learners. So one of the questions that we were asked is, why did DCB choose to develop a learning lab as a method of improving our continuum of services for students with disabilities? Well, the short-ish answer is DCB prioritizes a special education co-teaching model because it allows for greater collaboration for our teachers of specialized instruction that both engages and supports all students as they learn languages. For over 10 years at DCB, we have had self-contained classrooms that were specifically for level 4 students with special needs. Until 2019, students in what was then called studios were predominantly in the self-contained classrooms with limited interaction with their grade level peers. Students were moved to the general education environment with special education support when the need for that environment changed. The key here was that we thought we were meeting students' least restrictive environments. However, when we looked at the information, we noted that students were not getting enough peer interaction, and the mainstreaming of students was not standardized. We wanted to improve our continuum of services by offering an educational environment where we asked ourselves, what is the best environment for the student to learn this subject, looking at each of our discrete subjects? Learning Lab offered that. We designed the program so that it could serve more students for shorter amounts of times versus fewer all day. Basically meeting students where they were, instead of saying, you're now in a self-contained classroom, you will be learning here, there's no flexibility. Students were able to be with their grade level peers, getting the precise supports needed, and also in a self-contained environment, getting exactly what they needed. We were able to prescribe exactly what the student needed by content, by social emotional learning throughout all grade levels. Learning Lab gave us the flexibility of program we have been striving for and towards for years.
All right, so thank you for that, Rohini, and I'm going to move into, the big question of, you hear Learning Lab. Well, what is a Learning Lab? And so we really, this environment was designed to be very purposeful and very specific. As you know, with with the project, the whole goal, as Rohini talked about, was to expand and really think about the continuum of services. And so this was sort of in addition to an already existing continuum. The focus for the Learning Lab is really to provide intensive specialized instruction. So, but it's even more specific. We really wanted to zone in on providing evidence-based interventions for students who needed them. And so this went beyond being self-contained, right? This was beyond being in a self-contained environment. This was, I know I have X amount of students who really need intensive reading intervention. This then became a flexible learning space in order to make that particular thing happen. So, you know, really enhancing what we're calling the least restrictive environment and providing, as always, we were trying to build skills that would provide better access for students to the general education curriculum. So again, the primary focus was on evidence-based interventions in reading, writing, and math. And one key thing here too was this, this sort of component that we always have to emphasize, which was that these interventions, this time in this classroom was not being used as a replacement for the gen ed curriculum. So this was an enhancement, right? This was, if we have a student who has difficulty decoding, we're going to use that time in that space to enhance that skill to give them better access to the general education curriculum. So next slide, please. So what were the strengths of this lab? Again, I think the biggest strength was dedicated time and focus on skill development. So this is, we're bridging the gap to content for these students. So we're closing remedial gaps. We're really emphasizing growth. I think many of you who are doing Read and Math 180 interventions with us now, we talk about growth mindset. The Learning Lab is all about growth. And so we'll talk a little bit about the emphasis on data to assist with that. Again, it's an additional layer of support in the special ed continuum. So it's not a replacement for anything. It is an enhancement for everything. Having a dedicated space with appropriate supports, right? Space is always at a premium, it seems, and sometimes we're always trying to do 3 things in one place. But this lab was completely designed, built, and dedicated toward the particular growth needs of individual students. And again, flexibility and agility, right? This is a space that we tried to design to flex with the needs of the students. Just as most, I think, spaces for specialized instruction, there are also spaces that we want the kids to not have to be in forever, right? So they need to be, it's a fluid design that really focuses on data so that we're making database decisions and then kids can come in and out of that space as needed. Next slide, please. Challenges. I think there's always challenges. We know in education, we are constantly trying to, figure out things and we're growing. We definitely face some challenges with the implementation of this. The biggest thing about developing this learning lab was we really realized how important it was throughout the process to have a shared vision for how it was being used. Because anytime you create a space or you design something, there can be various concepts in everyone's mind about how the space should be used and what it's for. And so we really had to take a lot of time, myself, the administrators, the teachers who were executing this intervention space, to talk about and be honest and hash out, what is this space for? So how is it addressing the needs for students with disabilities? Because we know our students have multiple needs, but the Learning Lab in itself, in particular, what was its role in addressing the needs for students with disabilities? How would the lab serve to provide a continuum of services? Again, it's an additional, it's a layer, but how are we all coming together to agree on what that layer is supposed to look like? And also, one of the big questions that we grappled with is there a place for tier 2 support for gen ed students in this? Because we, in designing a space like this, we know it's not just kids with disabilities who need the support. So, and what was our biggest challenge was like, we really wanted to maximize use and make sure we were utilizing it, to the best of our ability and expanding it to make it as useful as possible. And so that question came up, and, thinking about, if not now, in the future, are we going to design similar spaces to address tier 2 needs for students who aren't necessarily identified? And what came out of that was a lot of robust discussion. And I'll sort of, Rohini, I'll just give it over to you in a little bit to see if you want to add. But we ended up developing a sort of rubric that hashed out, okay, well, first of all, what does the continuum even look like? What are the things that we're offering kids with disabilities? And it's a tool that gave the administrators and teachers an opportunity to focus on each individual child with a disability and think about, out of all this continuum of needs, what can each of these students benefit from? And so I think that was sort of the biggest development in thinking about not only what the Learning Lab is now, but what it could possibly be and should possibly be in the future. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Rohini, to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely echo what you said. And for all my fellow educators out there, I can't even name the amount of times that we've put literally the cart before the horse and said, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to do it quickly, and we need to serve students. And so what this tool really purposely had us do was sit down and go through each student in a methodical way and take away the nuance that we had at our school oftentimes applied that really resulted in the inconsistencies that I had mentioned in slide 4, that we were able to say, okay, this is what we want for each student. This is what the ideal schedule would look like. Now let's do it. I think the best piece of advice that we received from Megan was, instead of making a schedule and forcing students into that schedule, identify what students need and then build the schedule around it. And though that seems really simple, it was life-changing advice.
Thank you. I'm here to change lives. Thank you. No, that was really good. Thanks, Rohini. All right. So what would I just want to give you a glimpse of what these classrooms looked like. And I think these images are themselves really show how intentional the space was. You can look at the photo on the right, for example, and you see this is a focus. It's very focused here. Like, these are very specific skills that kids are working on. Vowels, diagraphs, knowing particular phonics rules. And on the picture on the left, you can see the different book bins. So kids are working on, individualized, working on their reading levels. The other thing that we really work to infuse in the classroom for the purposes of being flexible is assistive technology. So we really actually looked at every single kid and, the teachers would say, like, this student, I know that this has, strong sensory needs. And so I think it would go far for them not only to have this space, but be able to be comfortable in the space and allowed to have jewelry. Because students were often different, working on different skills, having the noise canceling headphones were an essential component. So there was a lot of low tech, but there was also high tech, as simple as, I feel like these days we really need to call it instructional tech, which is our Chromebooks, because they have become an integral part of learning. But some kids had Chromebooks because they were working on a particular program and they needed that computerized support. While some students were working with Wilson, and so they weren't necessarily on a computer. So I'm sorry, welcome to my home. Um, so, but just an example of the variety of materials and tech that were available for kiddos. Next slide. Flexible seating, you can see on the right here was another component. So again, we really wanted to think about who the students were and what they would benefit from. This flexible seating also allowed for flexible grouping. Again, the assistive technologies. The reading instruction was very individualized. So some students were using, for example, Read Naturally, while some students were using the Wilson program. Some students, I think, I'm trying to think of others. It ended up, we were using about 4 different intervention programs because they were specifically chosen for student needs. And I think that's another thing to always highlight about intervention. Like there's never really a universal fit because every student needs something different. And I think this learning lab really highlighted a focus on really specifying the needs of the individual student and working on instructional skills accordingly. The big highlight, which here in blue, is that focus on data acquisition. This was all about data from the start, right? So we talked about that growth mindset, and these teachers, their total focus, they were allowed to be totally focused on growth, which I think is a big strength and a huge value, because sometimes when teachers are jumping between different things, it's hard for them to really zone in and have that intense focus on growth. And in the learning lab teachers were able to do that. So you can see in the chart below, this is just an example that I pulled of how student data was being tracked. So you can see the intervention is listed for each student. And what you're seeing here is what I'm calling the universal way that the students were screened. What you're not seeing here are the tabs actually that were added to this sheet that actually specify student growth on the specific interventions that they were using. So for example, if a student was using LLI, there was an LLI tab that had all the students who were using LLI and the growth measures for LLI. Does that make sense? So this was like the universal. Here we're checking out everybody universally, and we're screening everybody we're progress monitoring universally with Fontes and Pinnell. However, the deeper layers of data were tabs depending on which intervention students were accessing. So again, very, very detailed, very, very specifically focused on individual students. And next slide. Thank you. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I'm calling the building blocks of the classroom, because again, you have to sort of really think about what are the things that you have to have in place in order to sustain and create this environment. The first was infrastructure. Probably the most important thing as Rohini talked about and I mentioned as well. The adjustments had to be made to, scheduling for students and teachers. Later on in the process, I spent a lot of time sort of while they were executing, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do you observe an intervention classroom? Because every student can be working on a different type of program, I can't go in and say, even if I was administrator, it'd be hard to go in and say, oh, well, Ms. Cochran is using Wilson correctly, but this person is executing Read 180 correctly, and this is, this Read Naturally is being executed correctly, because they're all, so different, addressing different needs. But what I wanted to look for was something that grasped like the key major components that you want to look for in any intervention classroom. And so if you see on the right here, there's a chart that came out of the University of Texas that I really felt sort of capitalized on those key components of observing an intervention classroom. what things you're looking at. Like you're looking specifically at phonemic awareness. You're looking at phonics. You're looking at fluency. You're looking at comprehension, computation, very specific skills. That was a key component that I felt was essential. And then some other things to support that. So really looking at like, how are you seeing the differentiation occur? What does the student engagement look like? What I did was I had, if you attended the co-teaching session that we had, I had the creators of that co-teaching tool actually put this into, integrate it into this tool into that program as well, so that it can be computerized and provide immediate feedback to teachers. So I didn't start to really get to use that until later in the game, but it did help me finalize and think about, you know, as you continue, as you build structure, this is an example of an observation tool that you really want, you know, and you can integrate it into whatever your current observation tool is, right? Because you don't want to drop everything that you already use, but you want to find things that when you're looking in very specific environments like an intervention classroom, you really want to make sure you highlight, you know, specific things related to that you're not going to necessarily see in the general education setting or the regular classroom setting. All right, and again, just highlighting the materials that we use. A lot of Wilson reading, LLI, Read Naturally were programs used, a lot of assistive technology. All of that came together to create this environment. Next slide.
So the next few slides are going to be talking about the logistics of Learning Lab, details, and what it actually looked like. At DC Bilingual, we have 2 learning labs, so 2 inclusion classrooms. In Learning Lab A, they serve our younger grades, so pre-K to 3rd grade. And in Learning Lab B, it's 3rd through 5th grade. You'll see that a lot of the interventions are similar depending on what the students need, but in reality, we wanted to make sure that teachers weren't serving a wide variety of ages, because we were also aware of the social emotional needs and the opportunity for peer interaction within the groups. So if you had a 1st grader in the same room as a 5th grader, though they would maybe have potentially the same interventions, we want to make sure that the students were getting on grade level peer-to-peer interaction. Each class had a lead teacher, 1 in each lab, with a combined 14 years of experience with teaching grades pre-K through upper elementary. And with that, the teachers not only had a pull-out model in their classrooms in the Learning Lab, but also pushed into classrooms where they provided direct support, direct special education support, specialized instruction support within the general education environment, to give students a blend of what they really needed and in groups that they were able to access. In the next slide is a sample schedule. So this is a sample schedule of Learning Lab A. When I look at this schedule, it does make me a little sad, because it's just packed, because we broke it up in such a way, and this was one of our eventual challenges. Really every minute of the teacher's day was scheduled. There was a lack of flexibility when we originally formed the Learning Lab at the beginning of school year 1920, that we found that teachers weren't able to, once they set their schedule at the beginning of the year, they weren't able to add students, move students' schedules around as needed, as much as we would like, because as we all know, students are identified throughout the school year. And so when we made this schedule, we wanted to make sure that it was, in this coming year, we wanted to make sure that it was flexible enough that as new students were identified or changes were met, or interventions needs were met or changes were needed, that we had the flexibility to move things around without, for example, sacrificing Miss Amy's planning time or the ability to eat lunch. We really wanted to protect that time, because when you're planning for a group of 5+ kids who have a wide variety of needs, you want to make sure that you give as much planning time as possible.
If I could just jump in on that and further explain, like, that was definitely one of the challenges that we had to discuss, because, and it goes back to that putting the cart before the horse concept. The difference that can occur even for a teacher if the schedule is built around student need as opposed to schedules being built around individual, I guess it's sort of that shift from sort of the old school method of, looking at each kid and trying to create these individual schedules, as opposed to holistically looking at your students with disabilities, building those needs into the master schedule to create that flexibility.
While keeping in mind environment and making sure that students, our students was the least restrictive environment in the classroom. Were they only able to learn literacy and phonics while in a classroom with no other distractions? These were the robust conversations that we were able to have and build this schedule because of the tools provided to us from the cooperative, excuse me. And in the next slide, we're going to talk about goal setting and progress monitoring. I oftentimes joke that Miss Amy, one of our Learning Lab teachers, her love languages is details. Because when we think about setting goals, when we think about making goals, I never see anyone light up as much as Miss Amy when she's like, let's make a robust goal for our students. And being able to track it is really important. Many of our students who received interventions through the Learning Lab were making phenomenal growth throughout the year before pandemic came in. And we realized that they were getting the interventions that they needed and what they needed to learn. Also, the teachers were tracking the goals in such a purposeful and meaningful way that we were able to tweak as needed throughout the school year. So, for example, in the top graph, the beginning of the year data said that student 1 started at a level K and we wanted them to end at a level O. We had one student coming in who I believe was a year and a half below grade level. And then after before pandemic, would have been about 5-6 months of intervention support in the Learning Lab, had grown over a year, 1.2 years, according to Fontes and Pinnell, based on the interventions done within the grade level, as well as general education support and family support. And so we were really able to see the robust learning when we checked that against what our goals were, what the IEP progress monitoring was, and what our overall school goals were.
I would love to add on to this, just that as a teacher, this was a really helpful sort of, like, our school tends to love data generally. It's part of why I like my school so much. But as a teacher, sometimes when you're in the weeds of teaching a kid and working through really tough stuff, it can feel like, we're not making any progress. So being able to come back and say, actually, I set a goal that at term 1, this kid was going to be reading at level L in Fontes and Pinnell. And they are. It may not feel every day like we're making that kind of progress, but having something like this that's like really tailored to each kid helped us see that progress and it helped highlight the areas of need better, and also like helped us really feel good about the progress that we were making.
Thank you, Ms. Amy. And so in the next slide, we're gonna speak, though we've been peppering this throughout the whole conversation, like what is the impact of school closure and plans for school year 2021? So as we all know, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and it really paused what we were trying to do. But when we went to virtual learning in the spring, we were committed to doing the best possible that we could to build the specialized instruction plane as we attempted to get it off the ground. And so students did receive individualized packets to supplement their grade level packets throughout spring virtual learning. They had one-on-one scheduled with their special education teachers as robustly as possible. And we really tried to meet the vast majority of their related service hours during virtual learning. And ultimately, it was about relationships. We can't expect students to learn if they're not feeling safe, if they're not feeling secure, if their hierarchy of needs, base level is not being met. And obviously, the teachers in our school are phenomenal, exemplified by Miss Amy and the Learning Lab teachers. They really focused on relationships. They really wanted to meet students where they were. And so having that strong, warm, strict relationship of being able to say, like, yes, I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and also being able to push them to learn was incredibly important. And so as we designed our schedule for school year 2021, we realized that we wanted to prioritize specialized instruction. So we had a beautiful amount of flexibility once we decided our school schedule, which was synchronous learning Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and asynchronous learning on Wednesday. And so teachers were able to schedule synchronous specialized instruction on those days and related services throughout that time. We wanted to protect their time in general education as often as possible, because in this current reality, students getting the opportunity to interact with their peers is more important than ever. And so we wanted to make sure that every student had an opportunity to interact with their grade level, interact with their general education teacher, and still get the support from their special educator, from their special education teacher as often as possible. And so we found that we're meeting at least 50% of, or if not more, of all of our students' specialized instruction IEP hours. And our goal is to keep that as consistent as possible as long as we are virtual learning. Now, when we go back, that's a different story. It'll be a fun schedule to make. So with that.
So with that, we are opening up the floor for questions and answers. You can either, and I guess Monica, you can raise your hands or just put questions in the chat, and we will call on you. Don't be shy. And you can even, there aren't so many, oh, I see. All right, here we go. All right, so a question from Michelle Hess. How do you write IEP hours if you're trying to be flexible with groupings?
Do you mean in general, how do we write IEP hours, or how do we write IEP hours currently?
Michelle, I'm sorry, Michelle, are you talking specifically regarding like the pandemic schedule?
Like, how do we identify virtual instruction?
Okay, sorry. I think Julian, can you guys hear me now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was trying to type quickly to answer your question. I love this idea, and what I'm trying to figure out is, you spoke a lot about flexibility and getting kids what they need, and so I'm trying to figure out, like, let's say you start the year with a 5th grader who needs an hour a day in the learning lab, and so you're writing that pull-out hour on their IEP. Do you have like set times throughout the year that you kind of progress monitor and adjust IEP hours, or do you do it? That's where I feel stuck, is like, how do you write the correct hours while also allowing some flexibility to provide both in class and out of class specialized instruction? Thanks.
Yeah, so, that's a great, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, Michelle, I'll tell you my sort of approach and take, and then I'll let Rohini sort of share how they, have worked things out at DC Bilingual. Remember when I said like the master schedule is the key? And this is just my thinking. When you build the master schedule around student need, then you're actually building, I encourage people to move away from the random sort of hours and minutes in IEPs. And I say this because what is it that has allowed a person or the team to decide Jimmy needs an hour in order to overcome, he needs an hour a week in order to overcome this reading issue, or he needs an hour 5 times a week? Like, what are we basing that on? And so my approach, I kind of think of it as this. We are providing services in relationship to the general education curriculum. And the general education curriculum is set by a set of offerings that include time, right? So if at DC Bilingual, for example, we have 90-minute blocks of ELA, right? That's determined, how we're serving all kids. So if I build an intervention classroom and there's 60 minutes a day in that intervention classroom schedule, right? Then I'm probably going to say, well, actually, Billy needs X reading intervention, or he needs A reading intervention. He's going to have that block. He's going to be in that intervention block for 45 minutes a day, every day. And so I'm not having to craft sort of these, I don't know, sometimes I feel like they're random or just, I think that's where we get stuck. I think that's why it becomes hard, because if we don't have something and then we're trying to make something, as opposed to creating the need in the schedule and then, serving the kids accordingly. I hope that makes sense.
Megan, can I give an example? A real-life example with one of our kids.
Yeah, sure.
So one of our students last year began receiving the Wilson Reading Program through the Learning Lab, spent most of his time in the inclusion classroom, and then pulled out with me for 45 minutes a day to make that happen. And that was, on his IEP, we've got to put 3 hours because there's a box that we have to fill there. The thing is, though, that as sort of the year went on, and he became more comfortable with the program, being able to move through some of the material that we needed to cover, some of the instruction I needed to give him in that intervention, we end up with 5 minutes at the end that we don't actually need to do Wilson for those 5 minutes. So we can spend more time on relationship building and sort of filling in some of his other whole child needs. We can touch base about the writing project that he's working on in English. I can help him with some of the editing for that. So while it's still within the same content of what we're doing, and I still have that extra time built out for him, it's something that as his IEP, the whole year of his IEP goes on, it may start as something that's a really intense, we're going to spend this time focused on this intervention. And then towards the end of the year, if it's successful, we may not need to spend as much time doing that specific intervention, but still sort of working around within the same bucket, if that makes sense.
All right, there's a question here. So does this work only in an inclusion setting, or could it be adapted to a self-contained class, which is being pressured to focus on presenting grade level exposure in grade 6 through 8? So that's one of the discussions that we ended up having and really trying to hash out. When you all are done, I'll make sure we share the tool, because we started to think about maximizing use of both teacher time, because remember, we didn't want, you have the issue of teachers' schedules being crammed, and then you have burnout. And so one of the things which also goes back to service hours that I tried to sort of put out there and have people think about is, because, I fully believe, right? You got 6th through 8th graders, they need to have time just dealing with content, period. Mm-hmm. And so you may, we kind of came up with, you really needed 3 kinds of learning labs, right? Because one focused on intervention, because the intervention work in itself is intense, right? So one focus on intervention is not going to be really dealing in the 6th through 8th grade content necessarily. They can make some bridges, but they're really focused on specific skills. But there might be a learning lab that is about having self-contained blocks of content, right? Because I've got some 6th graders who have significant issues with reading, but they still have to take and do the 6th grade US history, okay? So we're going to create a self-contained US history block where these students are going to get their content in a small setting with specialized instruction, with a special educator. And guess what? Those same students might be fine to go to Gen Ed Math. They might be fine to go to Gen Ed Science, but we can really start to think about service hours. Again, if we're providing access to the general education curriculum, then service hours can absolutely be crafted around the general education curriculum, because what we're doing is providing specialized instruction in those areas where they need additional support. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's like, that's why it's so important to realize, like, what are you trying to achieve? What's the goal? If the goal is intervention, then do intervention. Don't tie it to everything else. You really have to be focused and specific in order for teachers to really be able to do a good job in whatever we're asking them to do. I think we struggle when we try to have special ed teachers do 20 different things and nothing gets done well.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel right now, that, you know, especially in this new environment and, you know, kids who really need to be in the classroom to help them to focus aren't, and they're home and there's a lot of distractions, and, you know, administration is pushing us to present the Gen Ed curriculum, but the SPED department is, you know, trying to support them. And, you know, I guess I'm looking at it now, I'm saying, wow, do we even have a reading intervention program this year? You know, and who's teaching it, and how are we going to be able to do all this? Our blocks are shortened, our time is less, you know, our day is not as long, so we have less time to try and put in more information. And with the students being so much older and still having these deficits, it seems like the support needs to be even more intensive. So do they really need to learn positive and negative numbers, or do they just need to know it in relation to money, because that's going to be relevant to them? So that's a struggle. I don't know, but this is helping.
All right, I'm just checking the chat. We are recording, so if you missed the beginning, it'll definitely be accessible. And I saw Julie answer that, sorry. All right. Any other questions, concerns? So I know Julie's going to close us out here, but we are still, the exciting thing is, like, we're still doing some intervention work this year. So even in response to the last person, we've got actually a lot of schools who are sort of embarking on this work with us to really focus on creating classrooms, instructional settings that dedicate time and fidelity to intervention programs. So I'm really excited about it, because what I want to see is growth. And I think the challenge for us is always, you know, we have Park, but look what happened to us last year. You know, when the state assessment isn't available to tell us how much we've grown, what's left? And we always, you know, I believe we want to have control over our own student growth, and we want to be able to define and contribute to that definition of growth. And we can do that if we're if we're implementing intervention programs with Fidelity and we have our own data. And so we can say, hey, you know what, we may not have met X mark for OSSE, but guess what, OSSE? Look at our students. Each one of our students, you know, or 90% of our students made a year's worth of growth in reading. So you can't tell me that it's, you know, things aren't working or things aren't happening. Well, you know, you got to be able to prove that you're going somewhere. And I really love what Amy said about, you know, I don't think anybody likes to feel like, you know, I don't think students like to feel like they're always failing. I don't think teachers like to feel like they're always failing. And so it's really nice to be able to do something with Fidelity and say, hey, you know what? It feels slow and it feels laborious, but my kids are making gains. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to be doing in this time of coming to a reckoning with racial equity. This is absolutely what we need to be doing. I always like to say we're doing the slave master's bidding if we're not teaching Black and brown kids to read. So, you know, and if we're not teaching them to do math, we're not teaching them to write. So that's what school is for. That's what we need to be doing. It can be done, but we got to focus.
Preach, Megan. I don't know how I can't really say more than that other than thank you so much to the DCB team and to Megan for doing this work. It's challenging to shift adult behavior and how we have thought about what special ed is needs to change. And we need to move beyond those like homemade worksheets and elevate our practices and move towards evidence-based interventions because our kids need and deserve them. So the co-op's all in on whatever we need to do to make sure that every student with a disability who needs an evidence-based intervention is getting one. So we'll be continuing to work with schools like DCB, our new partners, and then learning from that and pushing that back out to the broader community so that everyone benefits from it. So stay tuned for more from us on that. And with that, I'll close it out and thank you again, everyone, for being with us. We're really grateful to be in this work with you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Miss Amy, for
Yes.
coming in. That was